All right, hello everybody. It's time. We are going to be talking about Moon Knight episode 5. Now, to start off, spoiler warning. Spoiler alert. They're going to be spoilers. This was a huge episode. To clarify, as have been our other reviews of this show, we're not going to be going over everything. Why is my computer making that noise? We're not going to be going over everything. We're going to be going over the things that relate to DID. We have been diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, and the main character in this show has DID. So we are talking about that and its relation to that and its representation. So if you want a full... Why is it doing that? If you want a full breakdown of everything, go watch something else, but this is going to be going in depth specifically on the DID of it all. Let's jump in. We've got a lot to go through because episode 5, whew, that was a doozy. Also, if you haven't seen our other ones yet, go watch us reacting to episode 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Those are done in, those are just 2 videos. And definitely episode 5, there's some strong trigger warnings. So let's start off, and I just broke stuff down. It's not necessarily going to be in order, but we're just going to go through a few different categories. So 1, everyone wants to talk about Jake. Does Jake exist? Is Jake going to exist? In the comics, there was a third alter whose name was Jake, I believe. I could be wrong. It could be Jack. Everyone could be very mad at me at the end of this. We'll see. But I'm going to go over let's talk about a few of the reasons that people do think that he exists in this Moon Knight universe. The first sighting of him would be argued that was the scene in Egypt where they basically had a fight with a bunch of people, and Mark came to, and all the people were dead. And he accused Steven of having killed them, and Steven was like, that was not me, and Mark was like, well, that was not me. Who was it? Some people have argued that could have been Khonshu fully taking them over through possession, but a lot of people think that was Jake. Also, there was the second sarcophagus that was rattling in the inner world at the end of season 4. Inner world, afterlife, whatever, psych ward. There was the second sarcophagus that was rattling, and Steven had been in the first, so you'd think maybe there's another altar in the second. They never opened it. Could have been Jake. Now, in episode 5, there was a scene near the beginning where they were in the doctor's office with Dr. Harrow, and they had a bandage across their nose. And definitely we'll talk about later, there are different levels of them being injured in that office throughout. And that was definitely the most injured they were, the most beat up. And the voice, the mannerisms, everything, that was not either Steven or Mark. That was pretty clearly someone else. So a lot of people think that was Jake. And in that, it was like when he was saying, you're not a doctor. So that little scene, a lot of people think that we were seeing Jake for the first time there. It was interesting, the whole thing with the scales, because the scales weren't balanced when it was just Mark and Steven, and so we thought they needed the third heart. They need to find Jake to complete that, and that's why it's not balanced. But then that didn't end up being the case, so that was confusing. And that was definitely what our theory was and what was going to happen when we first saw that. And I'm curious. I do have my speculations that we might, because the next episode is going to be the last episode. And I do have my speculations that while a season 2 has not been announced, that there might be a little hint at Jake in the last 5 seconds of the show to hint at a potential season 2. Another little thing, and this might be just me looking too much into symbolism, but when Mark was a kid and was with his dad and blowing out the candles at his birthday when his mom did not join them, he was able to blow out all but one. And then that one candle his dad leaned in to blow out, and it took him 2 puffs to get it out. So Mark was able to handle a lot, but wasn't able to do everything. And he needed 2 assists. Maybe Steven and Jake. Although that could really be a reach. So let's talk about the doctor's office just a little bit. The different levels of injury in the doctor's office. So Steven was the least injured when he was fronting in there. Mark was the second most injured, and Jake was the most injured, which kind of plays into what we understand about their potential histories and also kind of how they function and what their roles are. There's a lot of speculation that Mark was the one who dealt with the daily neglect, abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse from his mother. Steven was the one who thought they had a great family. And a lot of people think that Jake is the one who took the physical beatings. And so that would kind of be representative in Jake being physically really roughed up and also being the one who was really scrappy and went out and murdered a bunch of people in the desert. And then Mark being tough and having to have gone through a lot, but not being quite as beat up. And then Steven being cleaner, more healed physically. So that's just interesting. And just so much with this whole show and the way it's gone is just going so much into like what is real, what is a hallucination, what is fake, what like the psych ward and the psychiatrist, psychologist, doctor, whatever, really trying to like convince them that that's just all a hallucination and them buying into it, but then going through something and being like, wait, no, this is proof that it is real, and then going back and being like, wait, it was just a hallucination. And the way that you're so susceptible to that kind of potentially manipulation, potentially help when you are going through something that is so destabilizing in your understanding of yourself in the world. That was very representative to me. So let's go into the origin of them, the origin of their system. There's a lot to talk about here. So first of all, and again, I don't know the comics. I did not read the comics. Don't be mad at me. I'm not doing a bunch of research, but I did go back because there's so much that happened in episode 5. So I wrote down like my own list of things that I wanted to talk on. And then I watched a breakdown of the episode and took things from that, and then also asked y'all for help and suggestions. And one of the things that we saw in that breakdown was that the way that Mark got DID in the comics was that he had witnessed a really complicated murder happen in front of him. And I believe it may have happened as an adult, but I'm not sure on that. And so I think that the reason that they changed it to childhood abuse is for how DID actually functions and being a good representation and an accurate representation of that, because DID comes from repeated trauma, not from a singular event. So no matter how traumatic witnessing a murder like that could be, it's the repeated trauma, the repeated abuse through childhood, through very specific years of childhood, that is the cause for DID. So I think that was changed for accuracy and accurate representation. Also, they showed Mark dissociating as a kid, which I think was a big deal, because you won't develop DID if you don't have a pre-existing strong capacity to dissociate as a trauma response. And that's how DID develops. If you don't naturally dissociate as a trauma response, you're not going to form DID. Something else will happen. So that was a good thing that they included. So Steven Grant being a fictive. A lot of people have questions about, like, is that a thing that exists? That alters will come from some sort of media? And then some people are like, okay, well, but then don't they usually, like, know that media and like have the same, like look the same internally or act the same or whatever. Fictives are, it's such a broad term, and a lot of the times it can just be the same name or like a similar look or something, but it doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily a whole identity that's copied. So that little thing can absolutely be a fictive. And then his feelings of invalidation once he discovers the fact that he's a fictive is a very real thing for many fictives in many systems, of feeling like they're not real and that there's something like fake about them because they came from an outside source. Another interesting thing is just the whole Steven accusing Mark of having made him up, and the intentionality behind that, and the concept of an original or of core theory. I would recommend for anyone here watching our video, What is DID and the Theory of Structural Dissociation, if you do not know about originals, core theory, and structural dissociation, because that'll explain a lot of kind of how DID is viewed in the modern world with research, and how it develops, and why a lot of the community is moving away from the concept that there is an original. So that's an interesting thing, and I think that this isn't necessarily pushing that, but it is moving into that. But I do think that just they still haven't used the term DID. I don't know if they will. And I do think that like Mark may even have distorted memories of that time and now recognize what had happened, so feel like he created Mark, or like he created Steven. But he really in that time didn't. Something split off and there was amnesia there. Anyways, that's its own thing. But the intentionality of that split and that creation of the system, and like it really does, this show does play into like Mark is the original, the others came after. But that's also, a lot of people still do prescribe to that theory. Just many people in our community are moving more towards the theory of structural dissociation as how DID develops, which is complex. Go watch our other video on that. So also how the system's structured, a lot of people have questions about, and I think that a lot of this just comes down to the fact that like our community is so obsessed with system roles. Now, if you don't know what certain roles mean, like host, protector, or anything like that, another video you can watch of ours is system roles and why we don't use them. So that'll kind of go over what all the different roles are and why we think that they're not necessarily helpful. And why I think that in situations like this, people are like, oh, but they don't fit into this perfect mold. And it's like, not all systems are going to. Those are just generalized terms that people use to help them understand. But a lot of people are like, well, if Mark's the original, then Mark's the host, which means that Steven's a protector, but then Steven had the amnesia and Mark remembers the trauma memories, and hosts don't remember trauma memories. It's not that cut and dry. It might often happen that way, but this way, how I see it, let's just say we're prescribing to the original core theory that Mark is the original. What it basically looks like is a new host was created. Mark stepped back and took the role of trauma holder, and Steven was there to essentially be the unknowing host. And that also, I do think, is an important representation for the fact that hosts change over time. Like, I, Charlie, have only been around for a year or two now. I didn't exist for our childhood. And I do have shared memories and everything, and I've learned about it, but I didn't exist back then. So I do think that that's positive, showing that, like, a host isn't necessarily the original, if an original exists. So, Mark and Steven progression over time, because we've seen a lot of progression for the two of them between the last scene of season 4, or of episode 4, and then all of episode 5. They were working against each other the whole show, which is very common for systems before reaching a certain level of acceptance and a big shift. But Steven and Mark really come together, and there's a few different things. So Mark, throughout the show, almost every time, even if he conceded that he would do what Steven wanted, he would generally end up not ending up doing the thing that Steven wanted, and he would usually win throughout the show. Episode 5 was the first time that Steven really won consistently. No, we're not going to kill the hippo. No, yes, I am going to go and see these memories. I'm not going to listen to you. I'm going to go do this. And Mark's kind of starting to listen, and he's starting to understand, like, okay, maybe my first impulse, maybe the violence impulse isn't the thing. Maybe I do need to learn from you, Steven. And also fighting against Steven, learning those memories, but eventually conceding. Them working together and Steven comforting Mark and letting him know it wasn't your fault that our brother died. That wasn't on you. You were a child. Like, him being there to comfort Mark through that is a big thing. Just a little thing that is, like, heartbreaking to think about is that Steven kind of became Mark's brother and then died somewhat because of Mark. Anyways, and then Steven obviously standing up to protect Mark and sacrificing himself in the end. Now, let's talk about Steven's death. I feel like almost anything we're going to theorize about right now is probably not going to be what ends up happening, but there's a lot to this and a lot to talk about. The main thing that I'm interested in is the possibility that, sorry, I just got a meds reminder. It's the possibility that his death was actually a fusion, because in DID, in real life, alters can't die. An alter is a part of your brain. And alters can go dormant, or alters can fuse, but alters don't die. Obviously, we're playing with a lot of different things here. We're playing with the afterlife, or we're playing with superpowers, stuff like that. So who knows? But the possibility that, like, a lot of the times alters will fuse after coming together more and stopping working against each other and starting to share trauma memories and learning how to work together and bring down those amnesic barriers. So is it possible that Steven was putting Mark in his role and being like, you be the one to fight, you be the one to protect us, you can do this. Wait, but if I'm you, I can do this. That line. And then going in and him fighting and him protecting Mark. And then sacrificing himself. Could that be representative of a fusion? And them coming together and accepting that they are the same in many ways. And that's just interesting. And I have mixed feelings about that because of the fact that made the skills, the skills balance. Because that implies that they got rid of their imbalance by getting rid of an alter, by fusing. And we have such a big thing in our community, especially in the past of DID research, that was so fusion only, like fusion is the only way to heal mentality and forced fusion. In my opinion, the goal for DID is healing. If fusion happens as a result of healing, that's wonderful. That's excellent. But forced fusion often will actually just cause more issues. And there is so much fusion-only mentality in the sense of healing and in the sense of therapy that it did kind of feel like the whole, like, get rid of your alters and that's how you heal type thing. So we'll see where they go with that. But yeah, that was very interesting. Okay, now let's just talk about some general DID representation throughout this. The switch on the street from Mark to Steven when Mark was sobbing, and then Steven fronted, and it was completely neutral. Like immediately fine. I know that we have had that happen before. I know we have seen other systems have that happen before. And it can be very jarring when you're on the outside of that watching a different system go through that. And that was just a very relatable and accurate moment there. And then, so the intentional denial and kind of willing amnesia about Steven's phone calls, and in that switch, Steven picks up the phone and starts talking to his mom, and that's the first time you can see the phone screen, and it's not on a phone call. So you know he's not even on a phone call. He's not even like talking to a voicemail, and it just shows like amnesia works so hard with DID that even if you know, like any logical person would be like, you did not make a phone call. You are not on the phone with someone, so you know that she's not there. So obviously you know that something's wrong. But the amount that your brain will work to keep you in denial about this is never ending. It's huge. So I think that played a lot into that denial. And like when he's in the office with Dr. Harrow and is saying like, no, don't call her. We don't want to bother her. We don't want to like leave her alone. It's fine, because he knows that no one's going to pick up, but he's in so much denial about that. And that connects a lot to people's denial about learning about your system, becoming aware of your system, accepting your system. And just is a lot of how dissociative amnesia works when it comes to DID, at least, is there's just things that it feels from the outside when you look at it in a logical way. It's like, you knew this though, but they didn't, because the mind is working so hard to keep them, even if it's an intentional denial. It is full denial, full intentional denial, and amnesia. So that was just an interesting thing to it. The way that different rooms held different memories that belong to different alters is very reminiscent to the way that we've heard a lot of systems explain their inner worlds working. So that was just a cool representation that felt like it had been researched and was taken from how people actually explain their inner worlds working and how people explain memory holding and sharing working. The kind of arguments that happened when Mark was pleading with Steven not to look at these memories, because that's what trauma holders are there to do. Again, don't love system roles, but we're going to use it right now. Like, trauma holders are there to keep people who are not ready from knowing that trauma from knowing it. And the amount of panic that can happen when someone is starting to catch on to a memory or learn about a memory that they're not supposed to know can be huge in systems and can cause huge panic attacks and breakdowns and fights. So that felt very accurate. Something our partner brought up is like, Steven's obsessed with Egyptology and all of this stuff. And along with that intentional denial and amnesia, like, how did he somehow avoid what clearly in this universe is supposed to be Indiana Jones? Like, that big of a franchise that's about like an explorer and learning about like ancient stuff. How did he avoid that movie that had his source in it, Stephen Grant? And that just, again, is another showing of that intentional amnesia, intentional denial that goes into keeping the system functioning the way it was created to. So a lot of people's issues with DID representation in the media and a lot of people's hesitancies with Moon Knight in our community comes down to the violence and the fact that Mark is a fairly violent person and turns to violence as a solution. and that Jake seemingly might be pretty violent. I personally am more and more believing that this isn't that much of an issue when it comes to DID representation or anything, because not only do we have the context that this is a superhero movie, but also the violent character is the hero. They are the protagonist. They are completely humanized. They're not shown as a villain. They're not supposed to scare you. And the violence isn't his main thing. Not only that, but he is over time listening more and more to Steven and finding more nonviolent solutions to things, which also could support the possibility of them having fused. And that's why Steven died. The representation was good in the moment of Steven. I forget exactly. I think they were talking about if Layla died, and Steven said, "It'll all be your fault." And that was a trigger phrase that Mark had from his mother saying that as a kid and yelling that at him. And that phrase just sent him into a complete flashback spiral where he started hitting himself on the head and then ended up in the doctor's office. And that, that's really real, that there are those little things like trigger phrases, triggers that will send you into a full flashback, even if it was a completely disconnected thing. The switch convention of the eyes rolling back and everything, it's useful for TV. It shows you what's happening. It's not realistic. We can overlook that. It's fine. But it's not how it works day to day. And then one thing that I just found interesting is that Steven, throughout the show, you see him very comfortable with speaking to people who never speak back. Not only his mom on the phone, but also the Golden Man, the street performer. And that feels very reminiscent of how communication internally feels often, how someone in Steven's role is completely disconnected from communication with the alters in their system, and while they might be getting like silent input, and while what they're doing the other alters might pick up on, they are not getting direct communication back. And a lot of the time communication with alters in your system can feel very like, I can't tell you how often we're just sitting here and I'm just like, I can feel that someone's nearby, and I start talking to whoever might be nearby out loud and feel a little crazy, but like it helps with communication a lot of the times, but sometimes nothing happens. And I'm just sitting here talking to someone who I can feel is here, but I'm hearing nothing back. I'm not getting any response. So that was just an interesting little bit of symbolism and representation in my mind. There was so much in this episode. I'm sorry if we didn't cover anything you wanted us to cover, but those are the long and short thoughts that I had on all of this. If you have any more questions or things you'd like us to cover, maybe comment them below, and we will potentially make some TikToks speaking about those individual points. But for now, I hope you all have a wonderful day. Take care of yourselves, get some rest, drink some water, eat some food, take your meds, and I am excited for the next episode to come out. I really do think that this is doing amazing things for our community. We have had such bad representation in the media in the past, and I think that they really did a stellar job with this so far. And it really is very impactful and very meaningful to see something on this big of a media scale really taking things seriously and doing a good job of representing our disorder, in my opinion. Anyways, bye everyone.